Good morning. How are you doing today, James?
I'm doing well. On yourself?
Fantastic. Are you in North Carolina now?
I am not. I'm actually in New York City.
New York City. Okay, but you've got some ties to the Carolinas, don't you?
I do, yes. I lived in Charlotte for a number of years. My band was based out of Charlotte and Noda, and the band was called Matrimony. So I think if anyone from Charlotte, most people from Charlotte, at least 5 years ago, would remember who we were.
Oh,
So yeah.
have you seen Noda lately? Oh my God, James.
I know I keep getting these Zillow notifications saying that the house that I bought for 180,000 is now worth 750,000.
Ever since the train started going through there, that whole entire lay of land is just it's not the Noda we grew up with. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they still have the evening news in the neighborhood theater, so that's good. I'm glad to see that still there. But
So now the changes that are going on in Noda, would that be the unimaginable? Because in all honesty, that was our art district.
yeah. Well, I think where I'm coming from with this unimaginable podcast is more so to do with people's experiences, like in their personal life and how it switched their perspectives. And when I say switch to perspectives, it's been quite dramatic. One of the first guests that I had on, I'm not sure if you had a chance to listen to it or not, but Teresa Cropper,
Mm-hmm.
who she grew up in Chicago, and she was kind of born to be a child in the or a person in the civil rights movement, and she ended up working with Stevie Wonder on legislation for the Martin Luther King holiday, and she and Stevie Wonder got Ronald Reagan to sign off on that. And so she also lost 11 people in 12 months. And one of those months where she didn't lose someone personally was September, and that was 9/11.
Oh
So,
my God.
yeah, listening to somebody talk about their life and the way they grew up, and then the amount of people that they lost, and the different things they're involved in, and how that gave them a way of looking at life that they didn't have before. And it's also a way of looking at life, or just anything really, that a lot of people probably just don't have that perspective, and you wouldn't want them to have to go through it anyway. And that's what I find fascinating about these kind of guests, because as much as like it's horrible and tragic and so on for things, people to go through certain things, there's so much wisdom that comes out of that, and healing. And there's I don't know, I just find it really, really interesting, and I think other people are really feeling the same way. But that's not every episode's about tragedy. One of the other episodes that I have at the moment is from an actress, and she's done very well, but came from a very small village in Ireland, close to where I'm from. And and just hearing her story about how she was able to kind of take the opportunities when they came, and not procrastinate too long, and kind of overcome low self-esteem and things like that. And then just to see somebody come out the other end of that in such a successful way. It's just really interesting listening to that perspective, even though that's very opposite of what Teresa's is. So yeah.
Isn't it amazing how, as we grow through life, we become even deeper students in life because of the things that come from out of nowhere, such as the unimaginable? It's almost like, okay, what am I supposed to learn from this? And that's one of the reasons why I keep a defrag journal, because I will break everything down, because I know that everything is a lesson.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think I think the most important thing in for me during this podcast is to learn in general. Because I went through a period of personal tragedy myself a few years ago, and I did see how much it did transform the way that I look at things, like my lens. And that was what kind of gave me the idea to start talking to other people about their experiences, and what's happened between the thing that happened and now. And I've learned so much from doing it. I've made really good friends out of doing it as well, because the it's just like you're just talking to really real people, that then there's no fluff, and they're just talking about things that are that I find really, really interesting. Why are we here? What's the point? How do we overcome this? How should we look at this? What's really important? And I think that's one thing perspective has been described as, is what is important and what isn't. And so those are the kinds of things that we get into, and get to the bottom of. And we laugh and we cry, and there's music set to it, and it's not it's a roller coaster for sure most of the time, but it's really, really been a fantastic journey for myself so far. So I'm really excited and humbled to be a part of it.
So do you find yourself being a student, or are you a teacher?
Definitely a student.
Yeah, yeah. In
Yeah.
in the way of taking great notes, but what you're doing though, when you share it on the unimaginable, all of a sudden you're saying, hey, look, guys, you're not alone. There's some stuff going on, and somewhere along the line, I'm going to hear from you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's, the funny thing is that within, when I started talking to people about and put this name on this thing, this podcast called The Unimaginable, it turns out a lot of people have unimaginable experiences in life, and, are they going through something right now? And obviously, with the pandemic and, with different, there's been just a whole, over the last 10 years, there's been so many different things that have happened that have caused people to be displaced from their homes, death, sickness. Obviously the war in Ukraine at the
Yeah.
moment, and whatever. So, and I was actually spent some time over there and talked to one of the MPs of Ukraine, and she's actually going to be on one of the episodes coming up. But just kind of like knowing that people are going through so much, and being able to have guests on there that are touching on things that those people are actually going through themselves has been really cool, because people have written in so far, like just saying like, this really helped me in where I am in life right now. I had this massive decision with my job, and just hearing that episode and the way that she said that just tipped me over the edge to make this decision. And there's been, I think a lot of people have responded in that way, where they feel like it's just like they're not alone, like you said, and there are other people out there that do experience similar things, just probably in a different, it just looks different, so.
Here's a way out there thought. Dolly Parton says that country music is actually storytelling, telling the story of the people of the community. In a really weird way, because you are a musician, are you haven't you turned your podcast into just a long form song, because you are still storytelling?
Yeah, so so I've always been fascinated with the idea of making a marriage between words and music. And because I think in the words, there's always a sense of melody, and there's a lot of weight behind words. And so when you have, and then on the other side of it, with the music side of it, you've got kind of the same thing. You've got a lot of information being processed as a musician, and so to make a marriage between those two things to me has always been really fascinating, because that blend is kind of where the magic starts to happen. So yes, I think you're right. Like with the stories that the guests have, we have them tell the story of their lives, and I don't speak. So that's about 10 to 15 minutes. And I write music to that story. So
Yeah.
it's a score, like very much like a documentary would be scored. And so it's been really fun for me, because I get to kind of put into, put into music, put their story into music, but it's like 15 minutes long. So it's kind of like making an album every time, as opposed to making a 3-minute pop song, which has been really great, because you kind of taken into consideration somebody's life and what their sound would be like, what the BPM is of their voice, what the cadence is, the timbre, kind of like getting into it like you would be as if you're in a band, and so that's one of the things I always tell the guests. I'm like, what kind of band would you have? Or that's what I think to myself, what band would this person have? So it's been fun. So I sit there and try to figure it out, and and start jamming along to their stories.
That is so funny that you say that, because when I'm sitting down to create a campaign for an advertiser, one of the first questions that I ask is, who do you listen to? Because who they listen to will determine on what kind of energy or how I'm going to write that particular commercial. That must be a Carolina thing, dude.
It must be.
Now, you brought up Ukraine, and I got to tell you, one of the things that you cover really well is that the term "been to hell and back," and it can happen more than once. And I think that's what's happening in Ukraine right now, because you think of 2014 versus 2022, they're back in hell.
Yeah, Donbass was a thing before this happened. Before the recent Donbass, absolute tragedy. So I think, and just getting into like being in Ukraine and talking to people from Ukraine and helping them across the border, and talking to the member of parliament that I was talking to, that this woman called Ina Sovson. She kind of gave me a really good inside look into how things work in Ukraine, and how government spending could have been spent slightly differently. But obviously, like there was always this threat of this Russian invasion, but no one knew whether it was going to happen or not. And so it's just like anything else. There's always, everyone has their own kind of angles on what should have been done or what could have been done better, and it's always easy to say that with hindsight. But yeah, the Ukrainian people are very resilient, and they're full of love, and that's kind of one of the things from talking to them, even though they would be, displaced or have lost their husband, because mostly I'd be working with women and children at the border, and but they still had a sense of compassion that I find to be really, just, it was just amazing, to see them still have that. They were so thankful for people to be there, and I was just thinking to myself, how does this even happen? Like, one of the first times that I helped some people across the border, I was driving up and down this forest, which basically marks the border between Ukraine and Poland. And out of the forest, this woman in this red jacket and these two young girls were walking out. And at this point, I hadn't picked up anyone and didn't know anything and didn't know even where to take them. And so I pulled over and had my Google Translator app, and I said, "Do you need a ride somewhere?" Because I knew they were coming from Ukraine. And they said yes, and I ended up finding them a place to take them to. And the whole time we were just on Google Translate talking to each other. But she wrote me a note the next day, and that note was just like so heartbreaking. She basically said, "You've broadened my horizons. I didn't know there were people like this in the world." And I'm not saying that I'm incredible. There's so many people out that are doing that and helping in such a great way, but it's just how great these Ukrainian people are and how much they've been through, and they still have that kind of fervor for life. So I found that really fascinating. So the conversation with Ina is really a bit more of a political conversation from the inside out. Because I think we hear a lot of what's going on, from the whatever press that we listen to or media outlets that we listen to in America. But hearing her, and she's an LGBTQ woman, so she has a very unique perspective and has stayed there, and her boyfriend's still fighting.
Well, that's the one thing that's always inspired me about the Irish background is the fact that that poetry has always been the spoken language of healing, and limericks have always been been the forefront of that, and then you study that because it's how people speak.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's definitely a lilt to everything that Irish people say, and I think you're right. There's 800 years of history of violence within Northern Ireland. Just within the struggles that we have with Protestants and Catholics, and most people think that's like a 20-year-old thing, but that's historically been how long it has gone on for. So there's I think that's probably why I relate to the people in Ukraine in some way, probably, which I actually haven't thought about that before. So thanks for bringing that up for me, because I like that's actually really interesting. Yeah, so I don't know. I think that I think if you are somebody that really does have empathy and does care about other people, it's hard not to kind of respond to what's going on in the world right now. And I also, like, just to add on to that, I think that it's usually people that have been through something that's been transformative for them or difficult for them. Usually those people are the people that want to help other people, and I find that interesting as well. Not to say that other people don't do that, but I always, when you get talking to somebody at the border, or or some person that's like set up some refugee camp or whatever, usually that person has been through something. They feel very compelled to help other people, other humans, even if they don't speak the same language or don't know them at all. So yeah, I find the whole thing to be very intriguing in terms of just from like a human perspective, and what we're all doing here.
So from one creative to another, when you step into somebody else's changes, challenge, darkness, how do you keep it from growing inside of you? Because you know how it is. We pick up stuff from other people, and sometimes we can't easily shake it.
It's a good question. I think basically, from the things that I've been through in my own life, I thought were so difficult, and I thought that nobody else would ever have been through anything as difficult as what I've been through. That's the mindset whenever it happens. And then as I've talked to people that have had truly unimaginable lives, in my opinion, probably more difficult or tragic or whatever, they seem bigger and worse than whatever I'd been through, and it's really humbled me, and it's actually helped me in my own journey and my own healing process, to know that there are other people out there that have been through things that that this seemingly the magnitude is larger than whatever I'd been through. And I also, like, don't want to say that trauma can be actually quantified like that, because I think everybody deals with things differently, and it's not to say that one person has felt whatever happened to them is so much worse than whatever happened to that person, because it's really down to how that person responds to that trauma and what it does to them and how they deal with it. But for me, like, I've actually been it's been helpful. It's actually made my load lighter by talking to people, strangely. Because here, some people heal very well, and they get to a point in their lives where they're at complete peace with
Hmm.
life and death. And when you talk to people like that, it kind of makes you, like, I don't know, but like pull up your socks and like pick your head up and realize, like, okay, like, yes, this has been hard, and yes, you still have to, go through the process and steps of healing, and do go to therapy and do all the things for your mental health that you're doing. But like, just realize there's other people out there that been through similar things, and you're not alone, and there's a lot of them. And that's been really cool for me, to be honest.
Yeah. James, you got to come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you. We'll meet over there at the Evening Muse or the Neighborhood Theater, but we got to have a face-to-face conversation sometime.
Yes, I'd love to. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, you be brilliant today, okay?
Yes, likewise.
You bet.
All right, cheers.